The cold wasn't just in the air. It was a physical thing, a predator that had sunk its teeth into Leo's bones. He sat on the park bench, a silhouette under the indifferent hum of a single street lamp. It was 2:17 a.m. The glowing red numbers on his cheap digital watch were the only warmth in his world. Each shiver was a violent, full-body tremor, a desperate attempt by his muscles to generate heat they no longer had. The sound of his own teeth chattering was a frantic, lonely rhythm in the dead quiet of the suburban night. He had tried the front door. The deadbolt slid home with a final, metallic click just as he'd reached for the knob. He'd heard the low chuckle from the other side. Rick, his stepfather. He'd circled the house, his sneakers silent on the manicured lawn. The back door was locked. The downstairs windows all latched from the inside. He'd stood under his own bedroom window, staring up at the dark glass, a castaway looking at a ship he could never board. This wasn't the first time, but it was the coldest. His house key was a useless weight in his pocket. He'd taken it out earlier, clutching it in his fist until the serrated edges dug into his palm. The faint pain, a welcome distraction from the creeping numbness in his fingers. Now his hand was too stiff to even make a proper fist. He was 15, wearing only a thin hoodie over a t-shirt. He'd run out to take the trash to the curb, a simple chore. He'd forgotten his phone inside. Rick had been waiting for just such a mistake. It was a game to him. A lesson in responsibility, he'd called it once. A lesson in remembering your place. A low rumble started, distant and guttural. It grew steadily, a deep-throated growl that seemed to vibrate up through the frozen ground and into the metal legs of the bench. Leo's head snapped up. His heart, which had been beating a slow, sluggish rhythm, began to hammer against his ribs. Headlights cut through the darkness. Two bright, angry eyes that swept across the park and pinned him in their glare. The sound was deafening now, an aggressive roar that filled the empty street. A motorcycle, a big one. It slowed, pulling over to the curb directly in front of him. The engine cut out, replaced by a series of pops and ticks as the hot metal cooled. A massive figure swung a leg over the seat, planting a heavy boot on the asphalt. The man was a mountain carved from shadow and leather. A thick, dark beard covered the lower half of his face. His arms, visible below the sleeves of a denim jacket worn over his leather vest, were a roadmap of faded ink. He moved with a slow, deliberate weight, each step solid and certain. Leo froze. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like blocks of ice. Where would he go? The man walked toward the bench, his boots crunching softly on the frosted grass. He stopped a few feet away, his shadow falling over Leo, swallowing the weak light from the street lamp. He didn't speak. He just stood there looking. Leo could feel the man's gaze on him, a physical pressure. He stared at his own knees, trying to make himself smaller, trying to disappear. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken possibilities. Leo held his breath, waiting for the inevitable, for the demand for his wallet, for the threat, for the violence that the night seemed to promise. The man's voice, when it finally came, was nothing like the engine's roar. It was a low, gravelly rumble, like stones shifting deep underground. "You all right, kid?" Leo couldn't answer. The words were trapped in his throat, frozen solid. He managed a short, jerky nod that was more of a shiver than an affirmation. The man took another step closer. Leo flinched, curling in on himself. He could smell leather and motor oil and something else. Something clean like pine soap. "You're turning blue," the man observed. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He saw the boy's hand, clenched and white-knuckled, and the glint of metal between his fingers. A house key. The man's eyes, dark and surprisingly sharp, flicked from the key to the boy's face, then scanned the silent, dark houses across the street. He saw the story in an instant. The thin jacket, the useless key, the controlled terror in the boy's eyes. This wasn't a runaway. This was a lockout. He had a choice. He could get back on his bike right away and forget the ghost-pale kid on the park bench. It was none of his business. The world was full of broken things, and he wasn't here to fix them all. He'd learned that lesson the hard way a long time ago. But then he saw another shiver rack the boy's frame, so violent it looked like it might shake him apart. He saw the faint trace of a fading bruise high on the boy's cheekbone, almost hidden in the shadows. He saw himself, at another time, in another place, just as cold and just as alone. Time seemed to slow. The hum of the street lamp, the distant siren, the boy's ragged breathing, it all faded into a quiet space where a decision had to be made. His own code was simple. You don't start fights, but you finish them. You protect your brothers, and you don't, under any circumstances, leave someone to freeze. His jaw tightened. He made the choice. Come on, he rumbled, his voice leaving no room for argument. He didn't reach for the boy, didn't want to spook him more than he already was. He just turned and started walking back toward his bike. You can't stay out here. Leo stared at his broad, retreating back. The leather vest was covered in patches, symbols and words he didn't understand. One patch, a large one in the center, just had a single word: bear. Fear was still a live wire in his gut, but something else was there now too. A flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. He didn't know this man. He should have been terrified. He was, but he was also colder than he'd ever been in his life. And the man's voice held a strange, solid certainty that felt more real than anything else in the world right now. Bear stopped by his bike but didn't get on. He just waited, patient. He didn't look back. He was giving the kid the space to make his own move. After a long moment, Leo heard the sound of his own sneakers scraping against the pavement. He stood, his legs stiff and clumsy, and took a hesitant step forward, then another. He walked toward the huge man and the gleaming chrome machine, leaving the cold, lonely bench behind him. The ride was a blur of roaring wind and vibrating steel. Leo clung to the back of Bear's leather vest, his face pressed against the thick material, his frozen hands tucked into his armpits. The man's body was a furnace, radiating a heat that felt like life itself. They didn't go far. A few blocks down, they turned into a commercial area filled with low-slung industrial buildings. Bear pulled into the driveway of a large windowless garage. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was ringing. He swung off the bike and hit a button on a small remote. The large metal door groaned and rolled upward, revealing a cavernous space bathed in warm yellow light. Inside, two other men who looked like they were cut from the same cloth as Bear sat around a makeshift table playing cards. They looked up as Bear and Leo entered, their faces unreadable. The air, which had smelled of oil and gasoline, now smelled of coffee and something warm and spicy. Leo's fear, which had receded during the ride, came rushing back. He was in a biker garage in the middle of the night with three of the most intimidating men he had ever seen. He instinctively took a step back, closer to the door. Bear saw the movement. He didn't look at Leo. He looked at the other two men. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the large space. He's with me. That was all it took. The tension in the room dissolved instantly. One of the men, a wiry guy with a long gray ponytail, nodded and went back to his cards. The other, younger and broader, stood up. He walked over to a small kitchen area in the corner and came back with a thick wool blanket and a steaming mug. He didn't say a word. He just held them out to Leo. Leo took them with trembling hands. The mug was hot, and the warmth seeped into his fingers, a painful, tingling sensation as they started to come back to life. He wrapped the blanket around his shoulders. It smelled of wood smoke and laundry soap. He took a sip from the mug. Hot chocolate, rich and sweet. He drained half of it in 3 gulps, the hot liquid a blessed shock to his system. Bear gestured with his head toward a worn leather couch against one wall. Sit. Warm up. Leo obeyed, sinking into the soft, cracked leather. He pulled the blanket tighter around him. Bear didn't press him for details, didn't ask what had happened. He just pulled up a stool, sat down across from him, and waited. The card game resumed with quiet murmurs and the soft slap of cards on the table. No one stared at him. No one asked him questions. They just let him be, a silent, powerful acceptance that felt more welcoming than any words could have. He sat there for a long time, sipping the hot chocolate, the blanket a heavy, comforting weight. The shivering slowly subsided, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He watched the men. They weren't what he expected. They talked about engine timing and spark plugs. They argued quietly about a football game. They were just normal. Their world was filled with tools, neatly organized on pegboards that covered the walls, and the smell of hard work. It was a far cry from the sterile, silent tension of his house with Rick, where every object felt like it was holding its breath. Have you ever had to trust a stranger? That gut feeling when you know, against all logic, that you're safe. It's a powerful instinct, one we often ignore. If you've ever followed that feeling, share your story in the comments below. And if you believe in the quiet heroes who show up when we need them most, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that matter. Leo must have drifted off. He woke with a start. The blanket pooled around his waist. Morning light was filtering through a grimy high window he hadn't noticed before. The garage was quiet, save for the low hiss of a coffee pot. The card players were gone. He was alone except for Bear, who was standing at a workbench, meticulously cleaning a carburetor part with a small brush. He wasn't wearing his leather vest anymore. In a simple flannel shirt and jeans, he looked less like a mythical beast and more like a tired, middle-aged man. A very large, tired, middle-aged man. He must have heard Leo stir because he turned around, wiping his hands on a red rag. "Morning," he rumbled. "There's coffee, and I think there are some donuts in that box over there." Leo sat up, his body stiff. I should go." Bear looked at him, his expression serious. "Where's your mom, kid?" "Work," Leo mumbled. "She's a flight attendant. She's on a 4-day trip. Gets back tomorrow." Bear nodded slowly, processing this. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "This happen often? With your stepdad?" Leo looked down at his hands. He couldn't bring himself to say the words, to admit the shame of it. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He felt Bear's eyes on him, and he braced himself for judgment, for pity, for the dismissal he expected from every adult. Instead, he heard the sound of the metal part being placed carefully on the workbench. He heard Bear take a deep breath. When he finally looked up, Bear's jaw was set, a tight line of muscle. The look in his eyes wasn't pity. It was a cold, hard anger, but it wasn't directed at him. "You're not going back there," Bear said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decree. "You're staying here, till your mom gets home." For the next day and a half, Leo lived in a strange new world. He ate meals with Bear and the other guys who drifted in and out of the garage. They were Jax, the wiry one with the ponytail, and Cutter, the younger, quieter one. They taught him the difference between a socket wrench and a torque wrench. They let him help clean engine parts, his hands becoming stained with grease, a badge of honor. No one asked about his home life. They just accepted him. They talked to him like he was a person, not a problem. He learned that Bear had been a Marine. Jax had been a roadie for a band Leo had never heard of. Cutter had grown up in the foster system. They were a collection of strays, a family forged from steel and oil and mutual respect. He slept on the couch again that night, but this time it wasn't from exhaustion. It was a choice. He felt safer in that garage, surrounded by the smell of gasoline and the snores of a man named Bear sleeping in a small room in the back, than he had ever felt in his own pristine bedroom. The next afternoon, the peace was shattered. A sleek, late-model sedan pulled up outside the open garage door, its engine a quiet, arrogant purr. A man got out. He was of average height, dressed in expensive, casual clothes, his face a mask of controlled fury. It was Rick. He strode into the garage like he owned it, his eyes scanning the space until they landed on Leo. "Leo, get in the car, now!" Leo froze, a dirty rag dropping from his hand. Cutter and Jax, who had been working on a bike, slowly straightened up. They didn't say anything, but their posture shifted, becoming heavier, more solid. Bear emerged from the back room, wiping his hands. He moved to stand between Rick and Leo, a human wall. He was a good foot taller than Rick and twice as wide. "He's not going anywhere with you." Rick's eyes narrowed. He looked Bear up and down, a dismissive sneer on his face. "And who are you? I'm his father. This is a family matter. You have no right to interfere." "I'm the guy who found him half frozen on a park bench at 2 in the morning, Bear said, his voice dangerously calm. "That makes it my business." "He was being disciplined," Rick snapped, his voice rising. "He broke the rules. He needed to learn a lesson." "Leaving a kid outside in freezing temperatures isn't a lesson," Bear replied, his voice dropping even lower, colder than the night he'd found Leo. "It's abuse. Now I suggest you get back in your car and leave." Rick scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Or what? You and your little gang of thugs are going to stop me? I'll call the police. I'll have you all arrested for kidnapping." A slow, cold smile spread across Bear's face. It didn't touch his eyes. Go ahead, he invited. Call them. I can't wait to hear you explain to them why you locked a 15-year-old boy out of his house in the middle of the night. Tell them all about your lesson. See how that goes for you. Rick's face paled slightly. He hadn't expected this. He was used to people being intimidated by his money, by his position. He wasn't used to a man who didn't seem to care about any of that. As if on cue, Jax and Cutter moved, not aggressively, but deliberately. They flanked Bear, their arms crossed, their faces grim. They were a silent, immovable tribunal. The air in the garage grew thick, heavy with the promise of a line that was about to be crossed. Rick sputtered, his confidence cracking. He is my stepson. He will listen to me. Leo, I am talking to you. Get over here right now. His voice was a whip, the tone Leo had been conditioned to obey his entire life. He felt the familiar pull of fear, the instinct to comply, to make the anger stop. He took a half step forward, his eyes on the floor. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Bear's. It wasn't holding him back. It was just resting there, a heavy, solid point of contact with this new reality. It was a silent message. You have a choice. Leo looked up. He looked past Rick's furious, contorted face. He looked at Bear's calm, steady expression. He looked at Jax and Cutter, standing guard. He saw the tools on the wall, the half-assembled engine on the lift, the worn leather couch that had been his sanctuary. He thought of the cold, of the click of the deadbolt, of the silent, empty house. He took a deep breath. His voice, when it came out, was small, but it didn't tremble. It was as clear and solid as a ball bearing. No, he said. I'm not going with you. The single word hung in the air, severing the last thread of Rick's authority. The man's face went from white to a blotchy, furious red. He looked from Leo to the three bikers, a cornered animal realizing it had no fight left. He opened his mouth, then closed it. With a strangled cry of rage, he spun around, stormed back to his car, and peeled out of the driveway, tires screaming in protest. The sound faded, leaving a profound silence in its wake. The tension drained out of the garage, replaced by a wave of dizzying relief. Leo felt like he could finally breathe. Bear's hand squeezed his shoulder gently. You did good, kid. He looked at Jax and Cutter, a flicker of pride in his eyes. He then looked back at Leo. We look out for our own. When Leo's mom, Sarah, got home the next day, she went straight to the house. Finding it empty, she called Leo's phone. He answered on the first ring. He told her everything, his voice calm and factual. An hour later, her car screeched to a halt in front of the garage. She burst out, her face a storm of fear and anger, ready to confront the men who had her son. She stopped dead when she saw him. Leo was sitting on a stool, laughing at something Jax had said. He was covered in a light sheen of grease, his hands dirty, but his eyes were bright. He looked happy. He looked safe. She saw Bear approach her, and her maternal defenses went up. But he just stood a respectful distance away, his expression gentle. Ma'am, he said quietly, your son is a good kid. We just kept him warm. Sarah looked from this giant, tattooed man to her son, and the whole story clicked into place. The pieces Rick had so carefully hidden from her for years. The lessons, the discipline, the coldness in her own home. The tears she'd been holding back finally came, hot and furious. She walked past Bear, straight to Leo, and pulled him into a fierce hug. Over his shoulder, she looked at Bear, her eyes shining with a gratitude so profound it needed no words. Divorce papers were filed the following week. Rick was gone from their lives within a month. The years that followed were a montage of healing and growth. Leo and his mom moved to a small apartment, but the garage became his second home. Uncle Bear, he started calling him, and the name stuck. The bikers became the uncles, brothers, and father figures he never had. They taught him more than just how to rebuild an engine. They taught him about integrity, about loyalty, about what it meant to be a man. They showed him that family wasn't about blood, it was about who shows up for you in the cold. He finished high school with good grades. On graduation day, the loudest cheers in the auditorium came from a section filled with large men in leather vests, their booming voices and whistles echoing through the hall. He went to trade school and got his master mechanic certification. Years later, on a warm summer evening, the garage was filled with the smell of barbecue and the sound of easy laughter. Leo, now a confident young man of 23, stood beside Bear, both of them holding bottles of cold root beer. He was a partner in the shop now, his name painted on the sign out front right below Bear's. Bear raised his bottle. His voice was the same low rumble it had always been, but it was filled with warmth. "To family," he said, his eyes on Leo. Leo smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. He clinked his bottle against Bear's. "To family." One man's decision on a cold night, a choice to listen to a gut feeling instead of turning away, didn't just save a boy from the cold. It built a new life. It forged a bond stronger than steel. It proved that sometimes the most fearsome-looking dragons are the ones guarding the greatest treasure. True heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather and ride in on a wave of thunder, offering a blanket and a safe place to land. What you just saw was the power of one person choosing not to be a bystander. We all have that power. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that courage comes in all forms. And tell us in the comments, who is the bear in your life? We can't wait to read your stories.